All right, man. Peace to the 12. Y'all see the title. The Black Italians of the Neolithic Age. One more time, I'm going to say that. The Black Italians of the Neolithic Age. Neolithic Age was about 20,000 years ago, so they say, right? And yeah, I mean, the video is exactly what it says. And really, this is going to be a portion of something I was working on earlier, which is that I was doing another video on the Japhites, right? And the reason I'm doing this video in particular is because you have a lot of people that are invested in teaching that the current inhabitants are the Japhites. But what I always say and what I've been telling you guys for years and showing you with evidence, the original Japhites were dark-skinned people. All right, the original people that inhabited those lands, the land masses of the Isles of the Gentiles. All right, which you know as Europe, was originally inhabited by dark-skinned people, and even their own scientists tell you that. But then they just tell you that they evolved into white people, and that's how it happened. That's not the case. All right, I went over that. I went over that before. But anyway, this is just like I said. This is just going to be an isolated version of that. And today we're going to be talking about Italy, like Italy, Greece, that Mediterranean area. So let's get into it. So we go to Genesis 10 and 1. Now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and unto them were sons born after the flood. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, and Magog, and Madai, and Javan, and Tubal, and Meshach, and Tyrus. Now they say that Javan is a representative of Grecia and Greece. All right, Ionia, Greeks. All right, Grecia, Ionians, so on and so forth. They say that they're the descendants of Javan. Right. Now, like I said, you would see the current Greeks, and you'd be like, oh, okay, then they're the Javanites. But like I keep telling you guys, and I'm gonna keep saying it because it's true. Uh, a lot of migrations happened over the years, all right, and a lot of land masses. And like I tell you guys all the time, for those of you that are incredulous in what I'm saying and think what I'm saying is unbelievable, and how could that be? Just remember this, like I always tell you. You have the United States of America. You have Canada, right? You have Australia. You have New Zealand, right? All of these people are inhabited by the so-called white man. But as anybody knows, they're not originally from over there, all right? So just keep that in mind. So anyway, let's get into it. Let's get into 20,000 years ago, right? So there's a skeleton that's found that's known in the scientific circles as Grimaldi man. Right? Grimaldi man was an Aurignacian human thought to be a race of Cro-Magnon man. They found him in the Grimaldi caves of Italy, where two skeletons were found. Right? They say it was 26,000 to 22,000 years ago. Right? Where they found this person, early modern human that colonized Europe. That's what they say. Right? Anyway, looking at this guy, this is what they say Grimaldi man looked like. And if he did look like this, he looks awfully akin to an Australian Aboriginal man. I mean, look at the Australian Aboriginal man. Look at Grimaldi man, right? But anyway, somebody could say, well, how do you know Grimaldi man was black? I'm glad that you asked because people have already done papers on this, multiple, right? I only listed I think two, but there's more than that. So let's get into it. First guy we're going to go to is a guy by the name of Arthur Keith. Arthur Keith was a British anthropologist. He was born in 1866 in Aberdeen, United Kingdom. He died in 1955. He was 88 years old. All right. He was an anthropologist. All right. He studied the fossils of man. Right. He was a proponent of scientific racism. So it's not like this guy. It's not like this guy was how these people say woke. It's not like he was woke. He was a proponent of scientific racism, right? An anatomist and an anthropologist. So whatever he's about to say, all right, he was saying it because he knew it to be true. It's not like he wanted to throw the so-called black man the bone. No, because he, as he says, he was a proponent of scientific racism. So let's get into it. So let's go to Arthur Keith in his book Ancient Types of Man, right, by Arthur Keith. We're going to go to page 59 through 60. Really, I'm going to go to 60, but this is the title of the chapter on page 59. The title of the chapter is The Grimaldi or Negroid Type in Europe. right? He said negroid type, right? I mean, if you don't know what negroid means, he's talking about the Negro, right? It's talking about Negro features. All right, so let's get into it. So let's go to page 60. Ancient types of man. He says, yet Dr. Verneau, who has published the results of a minute examination of these two ancient individuals from various features seen in the skeletons, he had no hesitation in assigning them to a negroid race. Mind you, who is he talking about? He's talking about the Grimaldi man, right? He assigned the two skeletons to a negroid race. I mean, these were Negroes. They were so-called black, right? Mind you, this is the Neolithic age. When was that? That was 20, as they say it was 20,000 years ago, right? Like I say, I'm always skeptical about the true dates, just like I'm skeptical about the conclusion that one day they just they just evolved like a damn Pokemon into the so-called white man, right? That's that's what they tell you. But I've already done a video on that a long time ago. But anyway, it is an easy matter to distinguish the skeleton of the true Negro from that of the pure white. But there are many intermediate races, not hybrids, which show a puzzling mixture of characters. The ancient Grimaldi woman and boy are of the mixed or negroid type. So the ancient Grimaldi man and woman are either mixed or negroid. We associate large white teeth, full prominent jaws, and receding chin with the races showing pigmented skins. The shallow projecting incisors are part of the upper jaw, and the characters of the chin are certainly features of a negroid race. So are the wide opening of the nose, the prominent cheekbones, and the flat and short face. Yet the bridge of the nose is not as flat as the Negroes, but rather prominent in the Europeans. Right. So he's saying, they have certain features that make them see that they're either mixed or Negroes. That's what he's saying, right? Mind you, what did it say he was? Let me highlight this. What did it say dude was? He was proponent of scientific racism, right? So let's continue. Let's go to page 61. He says, indeed, in the features of the forehead of the Grimaldi remains agree with the Galley-Hill type. It is a remarkable fact that the natives of the uplands of the Sandwich Islands, a true Negro race, reproduce today the cranial features of the ancient inhabitants of the Grimaldi caves, right? And for those who don't know what the Sandwich Islands people look like, look at that. These are a little Google search. Look, Sandwich Islands. Look, dark-skinned people. All right. Right? These are the real Japhites. I keep saying this all the time, and I'm going to keep saying it. And like I said, this is just me isolating it. I'm going to touch on, hopefully, all the sons of Japheth and who they are, right? And who they're not, right? Because a lot of people are trying to assign the Edomites to the Japhites, and I'm not going to allow that to happen. I'm not going to allow them to do such a thing. So anyway, continuing on. Where was I? Read that again. Indeed, the features of the forehead, the Grimaldi remains agree with the Galley-Hill type. It is a remarkable fact that the natives of the uplands of Sandwich Islands, a true Negro race, reproduce today the cranial features of the ancient inhabitants of the Grimaldi caves. To appreciate the true significance of a Negroid race in the south of Europe towards the close of the glacial period, we must look at the distribution of modern races. Right, and then he goes into all that. So, yeah. Once again, the Negroid race was of the south of Europe. This Grimaldi man was found what? The Grimaldi caves of Italy, right? Thus, like I titled the video, the Black Italians of the Neolithic age, right? So let's continue on. Let's go to page 62. Same book, Ancient Types of Man. He says, the discovery of the Grimaldi race does not indicate that we have reached the common stock from which black and white races have evolved. That point must lie much farther in the past. Right? So he's saying that we can't even find a link to the so-called evolution of the modern races in the Grimaldi man, so they'd have to go even further back than 20,000 years ago. Anyway, He says, it merely indicates that towards the end of the glacial period, the negroid race, which we see in the north of Africa today, was already evolved and that it extended into Europe. The land connections between Europe and Africa we know to have been much closer in the time of the Grimaldi people than they are today. There are other evidences of a negroid race in Europe. The negroid traits of the Combe Capelle man have been mentioned, but there is also the remarkable fact that statuettes and engravings, which are assigned to this period, represent certain bodily characters of the Negro. So what he's saying is, in this time period, they found statuettes, they found engravings that once again leaked the characteristics right back to the Negro. It says the Grimaldi people are the earliest negroid type so far discovered, right? So look, that's what he said, man. Continue on. Oh, and for those that know, he's talking about Europe and Africa, land connections. He's going into Euro-African theory, right? The Euro-African theory, which I'm not really going to go too much into, but the Euro-African theory is basically, look at this Merriam-Webster definition, an assumed prehistoric subrace or type from which originated Mediterraneans of Europe and certain North African peoples, as in Algeria, Egypt, and Ethiopia. Also a person of such a subrace and type, right? So that's what he's talking about. He's talking about Euro-African theory. And notice he's talking about the Mediterranean. That's where we're at right now with the Grimaldi man, right? Anyway, continuing on, let's go to page 71. He says, the wide, short face, the extremely prominent cheekbones, the spread of the palate, and the tendency for the upper incisors to project forwards, and the narrow, pointed chin recall a facial type which is best seen today in tribes living in Asia, to the north and to the south of the Himalayas. Right, to the north and to the south of the Himalayas. I think he's going to name it in a minute. In some features, especially as regards their stature, the Cro-Magnon race were called the Sikhs, living to the south of the Himalayas. To some extent, they resemble the Eskimos. I don't know. People that now represent the Magdalene grade of civilization. So the people that he's talking about south of the Himalayas, these people, the Sikhs, he's talking about these people. So he's saying the Cro-Magnon man looks similar to these people right now, all right, around the Himalayas, right? You can see dark skin, wavy hair, right? Anyway, reading on. He says, the explorations of the caves of the shores of the Riviera near Mentone under the auspices of the Prince of Monaco have extended our knowledge of the Cro-Magnon type. The remains of the two negroids of Grimaldi, it will be remembered. In a stratum nearly 3 feet above the one containing the negroids, we find a skeleton of a splendid specimen of the Cro-Magnon race. Right? So the Cro-Magnon race, he's saying, looked like these people of the Himalayas, right? And then we already know the negroid he's talking about, they look like so-called Negroes, right? Mind, this is the Neolithic age, which is like they say, 20,000 years ago. So now let's go to another book source by a guy by the name of George Francis Scott Elliott. He was a botanist and an academic author of Franco-Scots descent. He was a personal friend of, that's not irrelevant. Anyway, he was born in 1862, died in 1934. We're going to look at his book, Prehistoric Man and His History, a sketch of the history of mankind from the earliest times. Right? From the earliest times. Let's go into it. Page 122 of his book, Prehistoric Man and His Story. We'll go down to here. It says, a recent discovery in the Grottes de Grimaldi throws light on this question. 2 skeletons of short negroids and a particular fine tall specimen of the Cro-Magnon man were discovered in the same cave, though at different levels. These negroids are dated by Dr. Mochi shortly after the warm ice age, but in Italy this was not so cold a climate as in France and in Germany. Right, so he's talking about the negroids again in Grimaldi caves. These are the same skeletons. This is from a different author. Right, and yeah, list the word Negroes. Negroid just means resembling or akin to the Negroes. All right, and this is a sketch of what he says he believed the Grimaldi man looked like. This is a sketch of it found. He says the Negroid of Grimaldi, a short race, perhaps the ancestors of the modern Bushman, which once inhabited the Riviera, restored according to the directions of Professor Routot of Brussels by Mr. Mascro, right? So a professor said this is what he would have looked like in the sketch. As you can see, so-called black man. Now the Bushman that he's referencing to is he's talking about people that are known as Khoisan, right? Or the San people. They have many names. The Bushman he's talking about is the San people, a group of indigenous peoples in southern Africa, right? While Bushman is the older, more traditional term, San is now widely used, although Bushman is still used by some, right? So let's continue on. San people are hunter-gatherer communities who have inhabited southern Africa for millennia. They are part of the Khoisan language group along with Khoikhoi, right? And Bushman was just some term that was created by a damn Dutch man any damn way. But nonetheless, this is what he's saying, that the negroid of Grimaldi looks something like. He's saying it looks something like the San people, right? Here are the Khoisan people. All right. And even I asked Google, and even apparently a lot of academics have this theory as well. Grimaldi related to Khoisan. The Grimaldi people, early modern humans found in Europe, were not directly related to the Khoisan people of southern Africa, but their physical characteristics and some genetic connections suggest a possible shared ancestry or migration route. Some theories suggest Grimaldi may have migrated to Europe from Africa via a land bridge, potentially connecting them to the Khoisan. Right? So apparently a lot of people have this theory. But anyway, going into this. Page 161. This is page 161 of the same book, Prehistoric Man and His Story. He says, the Aurignacians found the Mousterian or Neanderthaler in France. And during all the changes sketched above, the former seem to have held their own in that country. After the Worm Ice Age, the Aurignacians modified their weapons and mode of life, and after the theory which we have adopted, became the men of La Madeleine. These Aurignacians and their Magdalene descendants pervaded all Central and Southern Europe. So he's saying that all Central and Southern Europe had the Aurignacians in it, right? Now we're going to find out that he believes that the Aurignacians look like so-called Africans. We're going to find that out later. Right? The remains have also been discovered in Valletta, Malta, Phoenicia, and elsewhere, as we shall try to show later. But during this long period of time, two other races also succeeded in entering France and Italy. These were a negroid, perhaps pygmy folk, and the men of Solutre. We have seen that the Aurignacian, see look, this is what I mean. The Aurignacian he's going to say was an African. We have seen that the Aurignacian was originally an African. And if he traversed North Africa on his way from Egypt and Mesopotamia, it would have been a very remarkable fact if he had not come in contact with the African pygmy or his ancestors for the Bushmen. So, mind you, when he says that the Aurignacian people pervaded all Central and Southern Europe, he also is saying that he believes that the Aurignacian was originally an African. Right, now going down to here, he says, Wambatu and the other pygmies are the oldest African race known to us. The negroids discovered by Dr. Verneau in Grotte de Grimaldi, though differing greatly from modern Bushmen, allow that the Aurignacians were acquainted with a negroid stock. The Aurignacians were acquainted with a negroid stock. Right? Anyway. Page 162. He says, we find in the burial of the little negroid and his mother every sign of affectionate care and the same reverent bestowal of the dead that characterized the graves of the Moustier man already described and those of the Cro-Magnon race. Right? So, in other words, they had a proper burial for these people all the way back then. All right? They already knew how to bury people. And the Negroid boy is 15 to 17 years old. Right, anyway, coming to here. It says, moreover, since the discovery of this burial, characteristic skulls of the same Negroid affinity have been found in Spain and Brittany of the Neolithic date, at Sierra, not earlier than the 13th century, in Sardinia, and at Ostorf, and perhaps in Caithness. So they found these negroid remains in Brittany, which is in the French region, in Sardinia, which is in Italy, in Sierra Nevada, which is in Spain, in Ostorf, which is in Germany, Caithness, which is northern Scotland. This is where they found all these negroid skeletons, right? And this is what he believed the short negroid woman looked like. This is the short negroid woman discovered at, what does that say? La Soule, restored according to the directions of Mr. Rousseau, right, the professor, right? As you can see, that's what he said the Grimaldi woman looked like. Now we go to page 175, right? In page 175, it says, there would be no special amusement in a man wearing a necklace if there was nobody to admire it. The burials of these people show the same evidence of reverence and affection that we have noticed in the case of the Grimaldi negroids and even of the man of Motsier, right? So, once again, he's just basically talking about their burial practices. They had affection and reverence to how they buried the people, right? Continue on. Page 178. We begin with Neanderthalers and very inferior Aurignacians, accustomed to a warm climate and an abundance of food. But during the vicissitudes of the wristworm of interglacial, not only were these two races mixed up, but there were changes of climate and of food, perhaps also competition, from Solutreans and Negroids. At the end of this period, the more or less mixed race not only have lived through the worm, but seem to have developed enormously in all of the arts of life. They were still savages, but a very superior type, as we think we shall be able to show in a later chapter. Right? So he's letting you know that the so-called Neanderthalers, the Aurignacians, the Negroids, the Solutreans, they were basically, they were mixing and mingling amongst each other, right, in this time period. And they had developed forms of arts of life. All right. Then he also called them savages, which is just, that's par for the course for any type of Edomite that talks about anthropology, especially in the 1800s. Then we go to page 178, 179. It says, these drawings at Alpar, Kogel, Kalapata, and Terrell are according to Mr. Briel of the Magdalen age, but the people are not the same as those of the south of France in the Magdalenian. We have only seen a very short account of these discoveries, but these people were perhaps the descendants of the Negroids of Grimaldi, or an African hunting tribe, perhaps one of the very earliest Hamites in Africa. Until more is known about them, it is impossible to give a satisfactory opinion. Right? So he called them Hamites, called them Negroids of Grimaldi, and he found them in the south of France. Right? Found them in the south of France. All right, now we go to page 182, where it says, as we have shown in the last chapters, the Negroids of Grimaldi, who were surely allied to the African pygmy, seem to have been at least sometimes held in honor in southern Europe. That they accompanied the Aurignacians is certain, but whether as slaves, under gamekeepers, or professional devil dodgers, we do not know. Traces of this African pygmy blood seem to persist in Europe to the present day. At Daschenbuhl near Herblingen, Schaffhausen, a race of tall men were living together with the very short people at the very beginning of the Neolithic age. Similar people existed in French Neolithic times at Grat Faux at Marchaux in the Caveness of Magdalenian, right? I probably butchered so many of those words. But he says that the Negroids of Grimaldi were held in honor in southern Europe, and they accompanied the Aurignacians, right? And then again, his Idumean citizenship, and they could have been slaves. That's the first thing he said. But anyway, continuing on. Page 229. Is, as we have seen already, the Magdalenians or Aurignacians were not a pure race, for they had crossed both with the Neanderthalers and with the Negroid pygmies, right? Like I said, like I mentioned earlier, they had all been mixing together, right? They were a mixed multitude. Continuing on, page 329. It says, in Italy, the people who lived in the first hut circles used these tiny flints, and they are also found in the Terramore, also in Lombardy, Umbria, Florence, Tuscany, Bologna, Emilia, and also in Sicily. Extremely minute forms have been found at Bayous Rus near Mentone, in the famous caves in which the negroids were discovered. So the negroids was all throughout the places, man. Right? In Italy, all these places, man, that he mentioned. 334. According to Mr. Volnove, a small smooth stone, not larger than 50 centime piece, has been placed in the mouth of each of the negroids who were buried in Grimaldi. In a Neolithic cemetery at Monte Carlo, small round black or white pebbles were found with the skulls, and these, according to this author, had been probably placed in the mouth of each skull. Right? That was part of their burial ritual, probably some type of religious practice. In ancient Rome, as well as in Greece, at least in 600 BC, an obelisk was placed in a dead man's mouth in order to satisfy Charon, the ferryman. One finds it difficult to believe that the negroid population of Monte Carlo were in Aurignacian times able to form any clear conception of paying one's way into paradise. Why is that hard to believe? Why is that hard to believe? See, that's why I made fun of. See, it's not like this guy is biased. These people are clearly racist, but they're just acknowledging that, yeah, these negroids are the oldest skeletons that we found, right? But anyway, where was that? One finds it difficult to believe that the negroid population of Monte Carlo were in Aurignacian times able to form any clear conception of paying one's way into paradise. It's only difficult for you to believe. Still, this is not so outrageous an hypothesis as one might think, for essentially the same idea is found in the belief of many savages. Amongst the Punan, the ghost has to cross the river by a suspended log on the other side of the cities of gigantic helmeted hornbill, which guards the way to paradise. This bird tries by its screams to frighten an unfortunate spirit, so, yeah, this is going into their mysticism, blah, 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 blah. Their superstition. Prehistoric medicine man amongst many very different tribes. They had different superstitions for burial practices, basically saying. But you know what's funny now that I just thought about this? Let me go back to this and revisit this. I just thought about this in real time. He says that these negroids in the Neolithic cemetery were able to place pebbles in the mouths of the people they buried, right? Then he talks about how the ancient Romans had this practice as well. Now, the Grimaldi man was found in Italy. So the next question would be, where do you think the Romans got this practice from? Clearly they appropriated it from the original inhabitants. That's clearly what happened. You're telling me that in the Grimaldi caves they had this practice of doing that, and then we go fast forward to Rome, they're doing the same thing? Where did they get that from? Was it just coincidence? They just pulled the practice out of their ass? They clearly got it from the inhabitants before. And for those of you that don't know, Rome was Romans conquered a people known as the Etruscans, which I'll touch on at the end of this video. Right, for those of you that don't know that. But anyway, continuing on. How much more I got? How long have I been talking? 29 minutes, not too bad. Let's go here. Page 339. He says, a sort of tomb was made by placing one large stone over two smaller ones. This particular village seems to have consisted of keen traders for jet, coral, and especially two shells belonging to the Mediterranean, show that they exchange with very distant places. Two races are represented. One of the most numerous is the Cro-Magnon affinity. The others are allied to the short, vigorous negroids of the Grimaldi cavern at the Holderness, Lincolnshire. A settlement of similar intermediate age has been found. Right? The inhabitants possessed cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, horses, and dogs. They had a rather elaborate furniture, for they used the atlas of a whale as a seat and possessed pottery as well as flint knives and flakes, scrapers, and stone pounders, which show perhaps that they cultivated corn. They occasionally killed a red deer and were not quite destitute of human affection, for a child's plaything was discovered. So they had children's toys. They were hunters. They had domesticated all these different animals. They had pottery, chairs, all these things, right? These negroids that were found in the Italy cave, right? So now we're out of the books. Now I'm going to touch on something else. Like I said before, they want to tell you all this was 20,000 years ago. Well, we can go into part of the BC era as well, or further on along into the BC era, where they were still dark-skinned people over there. Right? We can look at the Minoans. When you look at the Minoans are a member of non-Indo-European people, meaning non-Caucasian. They flourished in 3000 to 1100 BC on the island of Crete during the Bronze Age. These are the Minoans. This was the base of their economy and power. Their sophisticated culture based at Knossos was named the legendary King Minos. So the Minoans, all the way into 3000 BC, they were still brown-skinned people. Right? Here's different pictures of Minoans, Minoan civilizations. Right? They try to tell you that lie that, oh, in this time, I bullshit you not. I read this verbatim in one of my videos. I don't remember which video it was. But there was a guy that really tried to tell you that, oh, these were white people who like to paint themselves brown with black hair. I'm not joking. That was a real thing. They said, oh, the males like to paint themselves brown. They like to paint their women's white. Yeah. Make that make sense, right? Look at this. That's what they like to say. They paint their women brown, or they paint their men brown and their women white. Yeah, make it make sense. But anyway, this is a reconstruction of a fresco found in Knossos. Young men carrying offerings to a goddess. Right? Here's another thing called, another work called The Africans in Bronze Age Crete. The Captain of the Blacks, fresco from Knossos. Small fragments of fresco from Knossos reconstructed by Arthur Evans depicted an African warrior preceded by a figure with lighter skin designated the Captain of the Blacks. Right? Yeah, with lighter skin, but it's still brown. And they say that this was in 1450 BC. Right? So all the way into this point, in the Bronze Age of Crete, they were still brown-skinned people. Like I've been telling you guys, this is nothing new to my viewers, my longtime viewers. I've been already brought this information out there, right? We can look at the Acrotiri, the Acrotiri. All right, Bronze Age art preserved by volcanoes back in 1600 BC. When we look at their artwork, right? Acrotiri was a prehistoric city. Its location was in Greece. And this is the paintings of the Acrotiri. For those of you that don't know, look at this, man. All these people are brown-skinned people. They have their little cattle, livestock. They're brown-skinned people. These people are dark-skinned. They have woolly, frizzy, afro-like black hair, as you can see at the bottom here. I mean, really, what else is there to say? You know what I mean? And like I told you guys before, the Etruscans were before the Romans in that region. All right, the Etruscans were a member of an ancient people of Etruria, Italy, between the Tiber and Arno rivers, west and south of the Apennines, whose urban civilization reached its height in the 6th century BC. Many features of Etruscan cultures were adopted by the Romans, the successors of power in the peninsula. So the Romans adopted their customs, like I alluded to earlier when that guy said that they had a way into paradise, and then the Romans did it in 600 BC. Yeah, they probably stole it from the Etruscans, to be honest. But let's go to another guy that talked about the Etruscans. We'll go to a magistrate and historian, antiquarian by the name of Godfrey Higgins. He was born in 1772. We're going to go to his book, Anacalypsis, page 216. This is what he has to say about the Etrurians. He says, Mr. Franklin makes an observation, which is new to me, that the ancient Etrurians had the countenances of Negroes, the same as the images of Buddha in India. So he says that the Etrurians had the countenances of Negroes, right? And I'm going to show you some art of some Etruscans, right? This is an Etruscan from 400 to 300 BC. This is a Polynesian man, a Maori Polynesian man. Look, they look... They look similar, right? For those of you that don't know, I've said this in previous videos. The Polynesian man, the Australian Aboriginal man, and people like that, they are the Japhites. All right. Then we go to this is another picture, an Etruscan antifix in 500 BC. He looks like Samuel Jackson with a beard. All right, literally. This is an Etruscan antefix in 500 BC. Looks like Draymond Green. Right? This is a banquet scene tomb of leopards in Tarquinia. And this debunks that dumbass thing I told you about earlier, how they said that the males painted themselves as brown and the females white. Well, obviously not, because this is a blonde-haired, probably blue-eyed white man next to two brown-skinned, black-haired people. Right? This is an ancient Italian painting. All right? And once again, he looks similar to what? He looks like a Polynesian, a Samoan man, things like that. All right? Let's see what it says about Etruscan civilization. It says much of its culture. Well, let me read this. It says the Etruscan civilization flourished in central Italy between the 8th and 3rd century BCE. The culture was renowned in antiquity for its rich mineral resources and as a major Mediterranean trading power. Much of its culture and even history was either obliterated or assimilated into that of its conqueror, Rome. So they just erased their history and assimilated it into their own culture. The Romans did, right? Which is nothing new. People have done that for a long, long time. The Babylonians were known for doing that. The Persians did it also. But anyway, Alexander of Macedon did it as well. He copied the Persians. But now we're gonna go into DNA analysis to end my video. I'm gonna read a couple of DNA analysis to prove my point home, which is that, like I keep telling you guys, that the current inhabitants of Europe actually came from what you would now know as Central Asia, right? Central Asia. That's where it came from. Central and Western Asia. And then they migrated through the Russian steppe into Europe, colonized that place, and that's how you have the current inhabitants. And for those that think what I'm saying is crazy, we're going to look at some DNA that's basically going to quantify what I said. Because the DNA analysis is going to say that, oh, when we look at the people of the Neolithic age, they're not even closely related to the modern inhabitants. They're not closely related because they're not the same people. Real simple. Anyway, let's get into it. All right, this is from Discover. It says, DNA analysis of ancient Rome reveals a cosmopolitan megacity. A new collection of DNA from ancient Romans spanning 12,000 years shows how the population of the empire's capital shifted along with its politics. Right, we're going to here. It says, the analysis found that the ancient Romans were from all over Europe, the Near East, and Northern Africa. Rome was a cosmopolitan melting pot kind of place, says study co-author Jonathan Picard, a geneticist at Stanford University. It doesn't match how most people think about ancient cities. It wasn't until about 3,000 years ago that the inhabitants of Rome started to genetically resemble their modern residents. So your modern Italians, they look like the Romans. All right, and if anyone knows what the Romans are Edomites, man. All right, I might do another video on that. I'll definitely get around to it if it be the Lord's will, on the Edomites and exposing them again. But anyway, let's go to another one. Let's go to PubMed.gov. It says ancient DNA from the first European farmers in 7,500-year-old Neolithic sites. We're going to go down to here. He says, we found that 25% of the Neolithic farmers had one characteristic, mtDNA type, and that this type formerly was widespread among Neolithic farmers in Central Europe. Europeans today have 150 times lower frequency, 0.2% of this mtDNA type, revealing that these first Neolithic farmers did not have a strong genetic influence on modern European female lineages. So, if you didn't catch that, he says Europeans today do not match the DNA of the Neolithic people of Central Europe. All right, the first Neolithic farmers do not have a strong influence in genetics to the modern European. Isn't that interesting? Let's get another one. Let's go to this PNAS article. Right? Go to here. It says the questionable contribution of the Neolithic and Bronze Age to European craniofacial form. Right? It says, it is no surprise that all modern European groups ranging all the way from Scandinavia to Eastern Europe and throughout the Mediterranean to the Middle East show that they are closely related to each other. The surprise is that the Neolithic peoples of Europe and their Bronze Age successors are not closely related to the modern inhabitants. Now, remember he said Bronze Age? Now, remember I showed you the Minoans? Remember I showed you the Minoans in the Bronze Age of Crete, who are dark brown skin? Remember I showed you that? Then I went into the Neolithic things, talking about the negroids of Grimaldi, and how he said that the Aurignacians were an African people, probably from North Africa. Remember when I went into all that? Well, now we go all the way to this study, right? Mind you, those books I referenced were from the 1800s. Now we go to this study, where it's saying, that the surprise is that the Neolithic peoples of Europe and their Bronze Age successors are not closely related to the modern inhabitants. Yeah, it's only a surprise because of the narrative that's put out there, like they've just always been over there. They haven't, right? Although the prehistoric modern ties are somewhat more apparent in southern Europe, it is a further surprise that the Paleolithic Natufian of Israel, from whom the Neolithic realm was assumed to arise, has a clear link to sub-Saharan Africa, right? So they have a clear link to sub-Saharan Africa. Boston and Canary Islands are clearly associated with modern Europeans. When canonical variants are plotted, neither sample ties in with Cro-Magnon as one suggested, right? So neither one of them ties in with the Cro-Magnon man like it was suggested. I wonder why. The data treated here support the idea that the Neolithic moved out of the Near East into the circum-Mediterranean areas in Europe by process of demic diffusion, but that subsequently that the residents of those areas derived from Pleistocene inhabitants absorbed both the agricultural life way and the people who had brought it. So they absorbed the agriculture and the people that brought it, meaning what? They took over that place. That's what that means. They absorbed it. So why they don't have a similar DNA, right? Let's go to another one. Let's go to Ellen Levi Kaufman. He wrote a paper called Journal of Genetic Genealogy. It's from 2005. He says, "We are not our ancestors. Evidence for discontinuity between prehistoric and modern Europeans." So he says, we are not our ancestors. Shit, you ain't got to tell me, right? So he says, the model of European genetic ancestry has recently shifted away from the Neolithic diffusion model towards an emphasis on autochthonous Paleolithic origins. However, this new paradigm utilizes genetic reconstructions based primarily on contemporary populations, and furthermore is often promoted without regard to the findings of ancient DNA studies. So what he's basically saying is people promote something that isn't founded on the DNA studies that have been found. These ancient DNA studies indicate that contemporary European ancestry is not a living fossil of the Paleolithic maternal dim. Rather, demographic events during the Neolithic and post-Neolithic periods appear to have had substantial impact on the European genetic record. Right? As a result, the genetic history of Europe has undergone significant transformation over time, resulting in genetic discontinuity between modern-day Europeans and their ancient maternal forebears. So he's saying that there's a huge difference in genetics between modern-day Europeans and the ancient maternal forebears. I know there is. We go to Science Daily, where he says, new branch added to European family tree. Europeans descended from at least 3, not 2 groups of ancient humans. Right? This is from 2014. He says, previous work suggests that the Europeans descended from 2 ancestral groups, indigenous hunter-gatherers and early European farmers. This new study shows that there was a 3rd ancestral group, the ancient North Eurasians, who controlled genetic material to almost all present-day Europeans. Research also reveals an even older lineage in the Basso-Eurasians. So, the 3rd ancestral group contributed the genetic material to all present-day Europeans, almost all of them, right? For Eurasia, like I told you, they come from Central Asia. All right? That's where they came from, Central Asia. This is a Eurasian woman, for those who don't know. She looks like a Caucasian woman, right? What are places like Central Asia? All right, the Eurasian people like Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, right? This is a Kazakhstan woman. This is a Uzbekistan woman. This is a Tajikistan woman, right? So-called white people, right? And they have the DNA, and their DNA is found in almost all present-day Europeans, right? Because that's where they come from, right? It's even in the name. The word Caucasian, where's Caucasian at? That's pertaining to the Caucasus Mountains, right? Which is basically a bridge between Europe and Asia. It's a mountainous bridge at that. It's also known as a Russian steppe, things like that. Then we go to this right here, Genes, Peoples, and Languages by Luca Cavalli Sforza. This is from 1997, July. He says, quote for the study, one reasonable hypothesis is that the genetic distance between Asia and Africa is shorter than that between Africa and other continents in Table 1 because both Africans and Asians contributed to the settlement of Europe. He said, what? Africans and Asians, right? So you got the Eurasians contributed to the settlement of Europe, which began about 40,000 years ago. It seems very reasonable to assume that both continents nearest to Europe contributed to its settlement, even if perhaps at different times and maybe repeatedly. Yeah, it was at different times. It is reassuring that the analysis of other markers also consistently gives the same results in this case. Moreover, a specific analysis of other markers Moreover, a specific evolutionary model tested that Europe is formed by contributions from Asia and Africa fits the distance matrix perfectly. In this simplified model, the migrations postulated to have populated Europe are estimated to have occurred at an early date of 30,000 years ago, but it is impossible to distinguish. On the basis of these data, the model from several migrations at different times, the overall contributions from Asia and Africa were estimated to be around 2/3 and 1/3, respectively. Right? So basically what he's saying is the Africans and the Asians both settled in Europe. Right? So yeah, that's pretty much that. How long did I take on that? 40 minutes. All right. So that's me talking about, once again, the Black Italians of the Neolithic age. And once again, the reason I'm doing this video is to straight up debunk that myth that the so-called Caucasian man is the Japhites. False. All right, like I said, the original inhabitants of those lands were dark-skinned people. Some of them look like Australian Aboriginals. Some of them look like Polynesians. Some of them look like Khoisan Bushmen. All right, and yeah, Lord willing, this lesson was edifying. With that, I say once again, peace to the 12. I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to the Heavenly Father, Most High Yahawah, in the name of His only begotten Son, yahawashi. Yahawah is the name of Heavenly Father, who the world commonly calls God, and yahawashi is the Savior of the nation of Israel, who the world commonly calls Jesus Christ. So I say shalom, which means peace. To you people that are out there listening and learning, you brothers doing this work, truth, sincerity, and to you elders that's been doing this thing before me, man. Really don't care if people believe it or not. It's the truth. Gone with peace.